So I have put up a slide on previous year DMB questions for the postgraduates to show that various aspects of ARMT have been asked repeatedly in the previous exams, starting from the pathogenesis, coming to the management of AMD, and even trials like Marina and CAT trials, which I will be covering in this class. So, coming to the topic proper, age-related macular degeneration is a leading cause of severe irreversible vision impairment in developed countries. It is a condition in patients typically beyond 50 years of age in which the structure and function of the macula deteriorates. A salient characteristic is the accumulation of extracellular deposits, includes subretinal drusenoid deposit, basal linear, and basal laminar deposit. These eyes may demonstrate neovascularization or atrophy. So these are the three major population-based studies, which include Beaver Dam Eye Study, Blue Mountain, and Framingham Eye Study, which have given data regarding the prevalence of ARMT globally. Beaver Dam Eye Study have showed 16% risk of ARMD in patients aged 65 to 74 years, which doubled to 30% risk in patients over 75 years of age. Framingham Eye Study and Blue Mountains Eye Study have also showed increased risk of ARMD in patients over 75 years of age. So, risk factors of ARMD. The most important non-modifiable risk factor is old age. Some studies have shown female preponderance, and among race and ethnicity, white Caucasians have the highest prevalence of AMD, with Africans having the least prevalence, and Asians, including our population, having intermediate prevalence. They postulated that the melanin is probably protective against oxidative damage. The ocular risk factors include hypermetropia, light-colored iris, and post-cataract surgery patients. Cigarette smoking is the most important modifiable risk factor, and the Beaver Dam and Ice Case Control Group study have shown 2 times risk of developing neovascular AMD in smokers compared to non-smokers. And systemic risk factors are hypertension and cardiovascular disease, and visible light exposure causing photooxidative damage has been implicated as a culprit in developing neovascular AMD. But there is no overall data to support the relation between UV exposure and AMD. Heredity is another important non-modifiable risk factor, and the two major susceptibility genes are complement factor H and ARMS2. If both genes have homozygous mutation, the risk is 50 times greater. Among the dietary factors, high fat intake and obesity are the risk factors for AMD, with antioxidants giving protection against AMD. Some studies have shown the risk of aspirin in neovascular AMD, while some studies have disproved this. So the current practice is that if patient is already taking aspirin for secondary prevention, he can continue the same. Broadly, AMD is classified into two major types: dry AMD or non-exudative or non-neovascular with hallmark feature of drusen and late stage showing geographic atrophy, and wet AMD or exudative or neovascular AMD mainly consisting of choroidal neovascular membrane and PEV. So going back to the anatomy, we can see a cross-section of retina with RPE monolayer, and there is Brooks membrane, which is the junction between the RPE and choriocapillaries in the choroid. Retina receives oxygen and nourishment from choriocapillaries. On the other side, retina disposes of waste material and fluid from retinal tissue into the choriocapillaries through Brooks membrane. Another major function of the retinal pigment epithelium is photoreceptor renewal. So various theories have been proposed to describe AMD pathogenesis, and the traditional theory talks about RPE senescence. That is, the aging of RPE cells lead to decreased RPE cell function, causing incomplete degradation of rods and cone outer segment by RPE. This leads to accumulation of residual metabolic debris, lipoprotein, and lipofuscin in the RPE. Along with this, there is Brooks membrane thickening, calcification with decreased hydraulic conductivity, which impairs the fluid and water exchange between the RPE and choriocapillaries, leading to drusen formation. On the other side, it has been observed that the choriocapillaries thins out in patients with AMD, which contribute to decreased removal of extracellular matrix, finally leading to drusen. So drusen finally cause further RPE dysfunction, leading to RPE cell loss and photoreceptor death. This explains the pathogenesis of dry AMD. Coming to wet AMD, as previously described, RPE dysfunction consequently lead to compromised Bruch's membrane, which stimulate photoreceptor and RPE cells to release vascular endothelial growth factor. The genetic theory states that the abnormal complement factor H activity stimulates the complement cascade, which elaborates inflammatory response and interleukin expression. IGF-ST through the broken Bruch's membrane, stimulating the capillaries in formation of new blood vessels. The new blood vessels are fragile and they can leak blood and fluid, and if untreated, it can lead to scarring of macula. The vascular theory says that lipid deposition in the sclera and Bruch's membrane cause scleral stiffening and impaired choroidal perfusion, which cause secondary RPE dysfunction. So, symptoms of AMD. Being a degenerative disorder affecting the macula, important symptoms of AMD include reduction of central visual acuity, which may be of gradual onset in dry AMD, and sudden impairment of vision in wet AMD. Patients also complains of central scotoma, metamorphopsia, decreased contrast sensitivity, decreased color vision, and impairment of dark adaptation, such as poor vision in dim light. So dry AMD constitute 90% of cases, and the defining lesion here is drusen, which are aggregation of extracellular hyaline material between the basal lamina of RPE and the inner collagenous layer of Bruch's membrane. So the appearance of drusen is the earliest visible clinical sign of AMD. Other indicators of dry AMD are RPE abnormalities, which include hyperpigmentation and RPE atrophy. So how to differentiate drusen and hard exudate? In the first fundus photo, we can see multiple discrete yellow-white lesions deep at the level of RPE. These findings are suggestive of drusen. In the second fundus photo, we can see waxy yellow intraretinal lesions with distinct margins suggestive of hard exudate. Since hard exudate is usually associated with diseases like diabetic retinopathy, there can be other diabetic retinopathy features like flame-shaped hemorrhage, microaneurysms, etc. So basically, drusens are deep-seated subretinal lesions because we can see vessels over it, and hard exudates are intraretinal lesions. So age-related eye disease study has classified drusens mainly into four main types, which are hard drusen, intermediate drusen, soft drusen, and drusenoid PET. Hard drusen or small drusen or droplets are round, discrete, yellow-white lesions measuring less than 63 micron. So 63 micron anatomically represent half the width of retinal vein at the optic disc margin. Intermediate drusen measures 63 to 124 micron size, and soft or large drusen are ill-defined yellow-white lesion with non-discrete borders more than 125 micron size. And drusenoid PED occurs when soft drusen progressively increase and become confluent. So this classification is significant because there is strong association between size of drusen and the risk of developing AMD over a 5-year period, with the least risk for hard drusen and very high risk for soft drusen. Histopathologically, drusen appear as colloid bodies or hyaline nodules, which are composed of eosinophilic material beneath the RPE, and they stain positively with periodic acid shift. There are also two entities called basal laminar deposits and basal linear deposits. Basal laminar deposits are granular, lipid-rich material composed of type 4 collagen fibers between the RPE plasma membrane and RPE basal lamina, and they essentially become cuticular drusen. Basal linear deposits are phospholipid vesicles with electron-dense granules between the RPE basal lamina and the inner collagenous layer of Bruch's membrane. They eventually become soft drusen. There is another entity called subretinal drusenoid deposit or retinal pseudodrusen, which are smaller than soft drusen with reticular-like network located on the apical surface of the RPE. So in the first OCT picture, we can see hyper-reflective RPE layer and benign areas of moderate reflectivity suggestive of soft drusen. Second OCT picture, we can see cuticular drusen between the RP basal lamina and Brooks membrane, giving a triangular appearance with pointed apex in the OCT. This is how cuticular drusen appear in the fundus, and they show starry sky appearance in fundus fluorescein angiography. In the lower two OCT pictures, we can see this is the RP, and we can see deposits of moderate reflectivity over the apical surface of RP, suggestive of subretinal drusenoid deposits or reticular pseudodrusen. The presence of these bodies are associated with increased risk of geographical atrophy and macular neovascularization. So drusenoid PD can cause RP cell apoptosis, which cause secondary atrophy of choriocapillaries, secondary atrophy of outer retina, finally leading to geographic atrophy, which constitute 25% of the severe vision loss in AMD. So geographical atrophy is well-delineated areas of hypopigmentation or depigmentation due to thinned out RPE and choriocapillaries. These focal atrophic lesions coalesce to form a diameter more than 175 micron. So if fovea is spared, the patient still have good central vision, although the reading vision may remain poor due to constricted central visual field. However, involvement of fovea leads to vision loss in geographic atrophy. So this is a color fundus photo of the right eye showing well delineated RP atrophic areas at the posterior pole with choroidal vessels visible underneath. And the fundus autofluorescent image of the same patient shows hypoautofluorescent corresponding to the areas of loss of RP and lipofuscin with surrounding areas of hyperautofluorescence due to high lipofuscin load here, which is an indicator that these areas are going into atrophy in future. Coming to OCT features of dry AMD, drusen I have already described earlier. The outer retinal tubulations are degenerating photoreceptors which aggregate into tubular structures. They appear as round hyporeflective spaces in OCT. Outer retinal corrugations are hyperreflective layer on OCT, which corresponds to basal laminar deposit. So how geographic atrophy appears in OCT. Here in this OCT picture, we can see thinning of outer retina with loss of RPE, ellipsoid zone, and hyporeflective band of rods and cones. Besides, there is hyperreflectivity of RP choriocapillaries extending towards the choroid due to increased penetration of light through the atrophic retina. So these findings are suggestive of geographic atrophy. So there is a new OCT terminology called RP, outer retinal atrophy, known as RORA. It can be I-RORA or C-RORA. C-RORA or complete RORA is defined if the zone of abnormalities are more than 250 micron, and if it is less than 250 micron, it is known as I-RORA or incomplete RORA. In FFA, drusen or geographic atrophy appear as hyperfluorescent area from window defect due to RP atrophy leading to unmasking of choroidal fluorescence. So AMD has been classified by AREDS into 4 major categories. The category 1 is no AMD, which include less than 5 small drusen, and category 2 is early AMD, which include multiple small drusen or few intermediate sized drusen or macular pigmentary change. And category 3 is intermediate drusen, which contain extensive intermediate drusen or at least one large drusen or geographic atrophy not involving the foveal center. Category 4 is advanced AMD, which include geographic atrophy involving the foveal center or any evidence of choroidal neovascularization. So we can see that the visual acuity is not a criterion for diagnosis of AMD, as advanced changes are sometimes seen with good visual acuity due to sparing of fovea. So coming to the treatment of dry AMD, important point to emphasize here is that there is no cure for dry AMD. The treatment measures are aimed at slowing the progression of dry AMD to wet AMD. The main treatment is dietary supplement and antioxidants, which I will describe in detail in the coming slides. We also have to address the risk factors and promote lifestyle changes, which include smoking cessation, blood pressure control, and obesity reduction. The patient have to be instructed to monitor vision at home using Amsler grid test. Amsler test basically evaluates the 20-degree of the visual field centered at fixation. It is a pattern of intersecting lines with a black dot in center. So how to do Amsler test? The patient has to wear his presbyopic refractive correction if he has any, and the chart should be well illuminated and held at a comfortable reading distance. So one eye of the patient is covered and patient is asked to look directly at the central black dot with the uncovered eye. He has to keep looking at this dot and report any missing areas, distortions or waviness of lines on the grid. So for a patient with normal vision, he can see all lines straight and evenly spaced with no missing areas or line. A patient with AMD will see somewhat like this. So if the patient comes with advanced vision loss, he should be advised to use low vision aids. So now age-related eye disease study is a major randomized controlled trial which established the benefit of vitamin and zinc supplement in reducing the risk of vision loss in dry AMD. It has 4,757 participants over 11 centers with a follow-up period of 6 years. It used a combination of vitamin C, vitamin E, beta carotene, zinc, and copper. So the inferences of AREDS were that early AMD has no apparent benefit, and it was found to be beneficial in patients with high-risk characteristics, which include extensive intermediate-sized drusen, at least one large drusen, geographic atrophy in one or both eyes, and advanced AMD in one eye, reducing the risk in these categories by 25%. The relative risk of vision loss of 3 or more lines were also reduced by 19%. Some studies have found increased risk of lung cancer in smokers taking the beta carotene. So AREDS 2 is another multi-center randomized controlled trial with 4,203 participants conducted by the National Eye Institute, USA. Inclusion criteria include bilateral large drusen or large drusen in one eye and advanced disease in the fellow eye. Participants were randomized to receive either supplemental lutein and zeaxanthin, supplemental omega-3 fatty acids, or the original formulation. AREDS 2 recommendations were that omega-3 fatty acids has no additional benefit, and they found that beta-carotene is harmful for smokers, and carotenoids like lutein and zeaxanthin are better alternative to beta-carotene, and they reduce the dose of zinc from 80 mg to 25 mg, which has lower incidence of GI and urinary side effects. So now coming to wet AMD, anatomically, macular neovascularization is mainly of three types: type 1, type 2, type 3. So here we can see this is the RPE and this layer is the Brooks membrane. Here the neovascular complex extends through the Brooks membrane and is confined to sub-RPE space. So type 1 is also known as sub-RPE type. Type 2 CNVM, we can see the neovascular complex which has breached the Brooks membrane and RPE and has become subretinal. And in type 3 or retinal angiomatous proliferation, neovascular complex arises from the deep capillary plexus and extend from the middle of the retina towards the RPE. Topographically, it can be classified into subfoveal within the center of foveal avascular zone, juxtafoveal 1 to 199 microns from the center of FAZ, and extrafoveal more than 200 microns from the center of FAZ. This classification was important in the era of laser photocoagulation, where it was found to be beneficial for extrafoveal and juxtafoveal lesions. So this is a color-funded photo of the right eye with the posterior pole showing grayish yellow lesion surrounded by a subretinal hemorrhage. So main signs of wet AMD include gray or yellowish pink discoloration or plaque-like membrane with medium to large drusen in same eye or fellow eye, subretinal or intraretinal fluid, subretinal or intraretinal lipid deposition, hemorrhage which can be retinal, subretinal or sub-RPE, retinal pigment epithelial detachment, RPE tear, and in the end stage, it can develop into disciform scar which cause permanent vision loss, about 75% of the severe vision loss in wet AMD. So, few words on pigment epithelial detachment. PD is a sharply demarcated dome-shaped elevation of RP monolayer from the underlying Bruch's membrane. It is of serous, drusenoid, hemorrhagic, and fibrovascular PD. In this OCT picture, we can see abrupt elevation of RPE from the Bruch's membrane with a homogeneously hyporeflective sub-RPE space, which is suggestive of serous PD. And this is a fundus fluorescein angiography image where we can see an area of hyperfluorescence with the late stage showing increase in intensity of fluorescence with the area remaining same, suggestive of pooling of dye within the PET in a homogeneous and well demarcated manner, suggestive of serous PET. So coming to the investigating modalities of wet AMD, the main indications of fundus fluorescein angiography include patients complaining of new metamorphopsia or unexplained blurred vision, and clinical examination revealing elevation of RP or retina, macular edema, subretinal heme, or OCT shows evidence of fluid. It is also used to determine the extent, type, size, and location of CNVM, and also to detect the persistence of recurrent CNV or other diseases following treatment. So the terminology used to describe CNV on fundus fluorescein angiography is derived from macular photocoagulation study. It can be classic CNV, occult, or predominantly or minimally classic CNV. Classic CNV lesions have well-defined boundaries with laser pattern hyperfluorescence in the early phase with late leakage into subretinal space. Occult CNV can be of two types, fibrovascular PED and late leakage of undetermined source. In fibrovascular PED, boundaries are well-defined or poorly demarcated with the hyperfluorescence in the early or mid phase having stippled appearance. Late leakage of undetermined source has poorly defined boundaries with hyperfluorescence only in the late phase showing stippled appearance. The predominantly or minimally classic CNVM is defined when the classic element is more than 50% suggestive of predominantly classic, or if it is less than 50% suggestive of minimally classic CNVM. So in this early FFA image, we can see well-defined lacy pattern hyperfluorescence, which increase in intensity and area towards the later frames of FFA suggestive of progressive leakage. So these findings are consistent with classic CNVM. In this FFA image, we can see ill-defined area of hyperfluorescence with poorly demarcated margins, which increase in intensity towards the later phase with stippled appearance suggestive of occult CNVM. Sometimes the neovascular membrane won't fall into any of these categories. So we can see both the angiographic features. For example, in this FFA image, we can see a classic pattern here and an occult pattern here. So occult CNVM is basically type 1 macular neovascularization, and classic CNVM is type 2 macular neovascularization, and RAP is type 3. So coming to OCT, OCT is the most important investigation in the management of wet AMD. It defines the cross-section architecture of the retina, which is not possible with any other imaging technology. We can identify the level of lesion, whether it is type 1 or type 2, and most importantly, the disease activity can be assessed with OCT, which include the presence of subretinal fluid, intraretinal fluid, and also in documenting the degree of retinal thickening. It is critical in monitoring the response of the retina and RPE to therapy, allowing the structural changes to be followed accurately. We can also differentiate CNVM from other pathologies like polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy. So on the top, we can see FFA images, which is suggestive of classic and occult components of CNVM. And below is the Fourier domain OCT of the same patient, so showing exudative features or signs of activity of neovascular AMD. So here we can see RP here with a highly reflective sub-RP component, and we can see it has breached the RP and has become a highly reflective subretinal lesion. And we can also see pigment epithelial detachment here with pockets of subretinal fluid on the either side of the highly reflective retinal lesion. So all these signs are suggestive of activity in CNVM. So these two OCT images show type 2 CNVM showing response to treatment. The first OCT picture show increase in thickness of the outer retina with the presence of subretinal hyperreflective material with pockets of intraretinal fluid and subretinal fluid. Post anti-VEGF injection, we can see that the CNVM has become more compact with no fluid spaces. And also on here, on either side of the CNVM, we can see loss of ellipsoid zone, which is a poor prognostic marker in OCT for vision improvement. So OCT angiography is an imaging modality that provides non-invasive evaluation of the retina and choroidal vasculature. So outer retina choriocapillaries slab image from the outer retina to the choriocapillaries. So in this first octa picture, we can see two pink segmentation line, one on the outer retina and one second one towards the choriocapillaries. And in this ORCC slab, we can see a characteristic vascular network suggestive of CNVM. But we cannot differentiate if it is type 1 or type 2. So we go to the second octa picture, which is OR slab, because we can see the pink segmentation line here has shifted to the outer retina. So outer retina slab is also known as avascular retina, and we can see the persistence of vascular network in this OR slab also, suggestive of type 2 CNVM. Indocyanine green angiography is another imaging modality which allows better visualization of the choroidal circulation. CNVM here is divided into hotspots or plaques, and there is increased sensitivity of detection of occult CNVM in ICG, and it can basically rule out PCV, RAP, and central serous chorioretinopathy, which all have similar presentation like CNVM. So in the figure A is an ICG angiography picture which show plaque with poorly defined margins towards the late phase. And in figure B is an ICG angiography picture where we can see two hot spots with the lower spot being more active. A few points on retinal angiomatous proliferation. They are mainly of intraretinal onset from the deep capillary plexus, and in OCT we can see extension of hyperreflectivity from the middle of the retina to the level of RPE, and it shows more signs of exudates and activity, and we can see in the OCT there are subretinal fluid, intraretinal fluid, and PET. Basically, angiography delineates the communication, and in octa we can see the downgrowth of new vessels towards or even penetrating the level of RPE. Retinochoroidal anastomosis, which are aberrant connections from the retinal to choroidal circulation, can be better demonstrated on indocyanine green angiography. So, polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy was earlier considered as a spectrum of AMD, and now it is a part of pachychoroid disease spectrum. It is made up of two components, polyp and branching vascular network. Clinically, it presents as reddish-orange subretinal nodules known as polyp, serous or serosanguinous PETs, subretinal hemorrhage, lipid deposition, or neurosensory retinal detachment in the peripapillary or macular retina. So, what are the OCT findings in ECV? So, there will be obviously pachychoroid, thickening of choroid, and there can be thumb-like polyp or sharp PET, which denotes the polyp, and here it shows tomographic notch in PET, which signifies the polypoidal lesion at the level of PET, and we can see hyporeflective lumen surrounded by a hyperreflective ring attached to the undersurface of RPE, and in some case we can see double layer sign, which is the presence of two hyperreflective lines on STOCT representing shallow irregular RPE elevation and Brooks membrane suggestive of abnormal vascular network. So ICG is the prime modality in investigating polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, and early phase of ICG show abnormal vascular network, and the polyps will leak slowly with surrounding hyperfluorescent area becoming increasingly hyperfluorescent, and mid-phase choroidal hyperfluorescence can be seen, and there will be late onset hyperfluorescence due to staining of the unhealthy RP. Some studies have described late geographic hyperfluorescence which become apparent approximately 10 minutes after injection of ICG dye in a rosette pattern. So this ICG angiography picture, we can see two elements of PCV. The short white arrows show abnormal branching vascular network manifesting with early hyperfluorescing, and the large white arrow shows polypata margin. So now this is an OCT cut which shows subretinal hyperreflective material with pockets of subretinal fluid on the either side. But we can see there is a thickening of choroid here and probably a choroid double layer sign here with splitting of RP and Brooks membrane. So this may not be an ARMD lesion. So we have to see other cuts of OCT and investigate further. So finally, coming to the treatment of wet AMD, various treatment modalities include anti-VEGF injection, which is the current gold standard treatment, photodynamic therapy, laser photocoagulation, and combination treatment. So earlier in the evolution of treatment of wet AMD, it initially started off with laser photocoagulation in the early 1980s, which has now become historic. And Macular photocoagulation study was a multi-center randomized controlled trial in which classic CNVM is identified on FFA and laser using argon or krypton laser. The extrafoveal lesions were treated with argon laser, and juxtafoveal and subfoveal lesions were treated with krypton laser. So the main findings were that laser photocoagulation was found to be beneficial for extrafoveal and juxtafoveal CNVM, and in subfoveal CNVM, treatment lead to severe BCVA loss. So eyes with large subfoveal CNVM lesions are not good candidates for laser photocoagulation. And also they found that the 50% of the lasered extrafoveal CNVM had foveal recurrence. Besides all these, the treatment itself left the patient with undesirable paracentral scotoma. So all these inferences necessitated the importance of a better treatment modality, and hence came the photodynamic therapy. PDT is a selective vaso-occlusive treatment targeting choroidal vasculature, especially abnormal neovascular endothelial cells. Verteporfin is a benzoporphyrin derivative monoacid. It is a light activated drug, and in this therapy, first we give intravenous infusion of verteporfin over 10 minutes, followed by a short wait period for 5 minutes to allow the verteporfin to selectively localize in the target areas, which are abnormal neovascular endothelial cells with upregulated LDL receptors. After 15 minutes, we give a low power non-thermal laser of light far peak at 689 nanometer for 83 seconds. This caused photoactivation of verteporfin, leading to immunologic and cellular damage, causing the endothelial damage of the new vessel. So this therapy may require retreatment as often as every 3 months if we detect leakage from CNVM on follow-up fundus fluorescein angiography. The diameter of the laser spot determined by angiography is greatest linear dimension of the lesion plus 1000 micron. There are various protocols for PDT, which include standard PDT protocol, which has verteporfin 6 mg per meter square body surface area and laser fluence 50 joules per centimeter square, and reduced fluence PDT protocol with fluence 25 joules per centimeter square, and safety enhanced PDT protocol having lower dose of verteporfin 3 mg per meter square. Important contraindication for PDT treatment are patients with porphyria, and we have to tell the PDT treated patients to avoid sunlight for 2 to 5 days after the treatment. So various studies done in the PDT are TAP study, WIP study, and WIM study. So treatment of AMD with photodynamic therapy study or TAP study basically compared PDT with sham in subfoveal classic or predominantly classic CNV. They found that at the end of 2 years, the BCVA loss was very less in PDT treated patients compared to the sham. In the verteporfin in photodynamic therapy study, PDT was compared with placebo in subfoveal myopic CNV and occult CNV. At the end of 2 years, they found that PDT offered benefit in myopic and subfoveal CNV and occult CNV with reduced disease progression. Vertiporfin in minimally classic CNV compared standard fluence and reduced fluence PDT versus placebo, and they found that the standard fluence and reduced fluence PDT reduced the risk of BCVA loss and reduced the progression of minimally classic lesions to predominantly classic lesions. So even though PDT replaced the conventional laser photocoagulation for the treatment of subfoveal CNVM due to AMD, most patients continue to experience loss of visual acuity even after treatment. So further attempts to optimize visual acuity outcomes were explored, and then finally came anti-VEGF injection. So now the current gold standard treatment for neovascular AMD is anti-VEGF injection given intravitreally. It was first cloned by Dr. Napoleon Ferrara in 1989. So what is the role of VEGF? Upregulation of vascular endothelial growth factor is a well-documented pathogenic mechanism in neovascular AMD. VEGF increase the vessel permeability leading to fluid leakage and also promote the growth of abnormal blood vessels causing neovascularization under or within the retina. The fluid leakage into or within the retina disrupts the anatomic architecture of the retina, resulting in sudden vision loss. So how anti-VEGF agent works? Anti-VEGF agent selectively bind to and inhibits vascular endothelial growth factor, which cause rapid resorption of subretinal fluid leakage, which result in drastic vision improvement. So first anti-VEGF agent introduced was pegaptinib in 2004 with a dosage of 0.3 mg 90 per 90 microliter given every 6 weeks, having T half 2 days and molecular weight 50 kilodalton. In 2005 came off-label use of bevacizumab given in dose 1.25 mg per 0.05 ml for every 4 weeks with a T half 5 days and molecular weight 149 kilodalton. Ranibizumab was introduced in 2006 into a dose of 0.5 mg per 0.05 ml given every 4 weeks with T half of 3 days, and it has much lower molecular weight, 48 kilodalton, which enabled better penetration in the retina. And aflibercept was introduced in 2007 and it is given in dose of 2 mg per 0.05 ml every 8 weeks, and it has a T half of 7 days and molecular weight 115 kilodalton. Main contraindications of anti-VEGF agents include active ocular or periocular inflammation, non-hypersensitivity to drugs, uncontrolled hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and pregnancy and lactation. The complications of anti-VEGF injection. Common minor complications are subconjunctival hemorrhage and local irritation, and rare ocular complications include lens touch leading to cataract formation, spike in IOP, non-infectious inflammation, retinal detachment, vitreous hemorrhage, and rarely endophthalmitis at the rate of 0.019 to 0.8%. Going into each anti-VEGF agent, pegaptinib sodium or Macugen was the first anti-VEGF agent approved by FDA in 2004 for the treatment of wet AMD. It is an aptamer containing small RNA strands having 28 bases. It mainly inhibits VEGF A165 and it is given in dose 0.3 milligram per 90 microliter every 6 weeks by a pre-filled syringe. So the VEGF inhibition study in ocular neovascularization is a study done in Macugen where it compared Macugen in various doses 0.3 mg, 1 mg and 3 mg given 6 weeks every 6 weeks versus sham in the early treatment of subfoveal CNVM for 2 years. At the end of 1 and 2 years, they found that 0.3 mg Macugen showed BCVA benefit. Now coming to bevacizumab or Avastin, it was first introduced as an anti-carcinogenic agent for the systemic intravenous treatment of metastatic colorectal cancer. It is a full-length humanized monoclonal antibody and it blocks all isoforms of VEGF-A. Rosenfield et al. Described and published off-label use of bevacizumab in 2005. It is given in dose of 1.25 mg per 0.05 ml every 4 weeks. So the systemic Avastin therapy for neovascular AMD is a study which was initiated to explore use of systemic Avastin for the treatment of neovascular AMD. This single center study bevacizumab was administered to 18 neovascular AMD patients, and at the dose of 2 to 3 IV dose at the beginning in baseline, followed by followed by IV doses at 2 weeks interval. Additional doses are given if retreatment is needed based on the OCT criteria. At the end of 6 months, the mean visual acuity were improved by 14 letters in the study eye and 17 letters in the fellow eye. Coming to ranibizumab or Lucentis, it is a humanized monoclonal antibody antigen binding fragment which mainly inhibits VEGF-A. It was FDA approved in 2006 based on 2 pivotal phase 3 trials, which are Marina trial and Anger trial. It is given in a dose of 0.5 mg per 0.05 ml once every 4 weeks. So the Marina study was a 2-year multi-center double-blind study with 716 neovascular AMD patients with minimally classic or occult CNVM secondary to AMD. They basically evaluated the efficacy and safety of monthly ranibizumab 0.3 or 0.5 mg versus sham. So at the end of 1 year, we can see that 0.5 mg ranibizumab had BCVA gains of 7.2 letter, with 0.3 mg having BCVA gain of 6.5 letter against sham, which had 10.4 letter loss in ETDRS. At the end of 2 years, we can see gain of 6.6 letters in 0.5 mg ranibizumab and gain of 5.4 letters in 0.3 mg versus loss of 14.9 letters in the sham group. Thus, the Marina study showed that ranibizumab significantly improved visual acuity from the initial treatment towards the end of 2 years. The Anchor study was a 2-year multi-center double-blind study with 423 neovascular AMD patients diagnosed with predominantly classic CNVM secondary to AMD. They evaluated the efficacy and safety of monthly ranibizumab 0.3 and 0.5 mg ranibizumab versus PDT. So at the end of 1 year, they saw a BCVA gain of 11.3 letters in 0.5 mg and 8.5 letter gain in 0.3 mg ranibizumab versus loss of 9.6 letter in the PDT group. And at the end of 2 years, they found a gain of 10.7 letter in 0.5 mg and 8.1 letter in 0.3 mg ranibizumab versus loss of 9.8 letter in PDT group. So the Angle study also established that ranibizumab led to rapid and sustained visual acuity gain measured at the end of 1 and 2 years. So while the result of the Marina and Angle trials were impressive, they were achieved by performing monthly intravitreal injection, which had an enormous treatment burden and also economic burden on patients. In an attempt to reduce the burden of monthly injection, alternative dosing strategies were pursued. So then came the PIRE study, which is a phase 3B multi-center randomized double-masked sham injection controlled study. And the patients were randomized to receive either 0.3 mg or 0.5 mg ranibizumab versus sham. And they were treated monthly for 3 consecutive months, followed by treatment every 3 months thereafter. At the end of 2 years, the visual acuity was obviously better than the sham, but from the 4th to 24th month of the quarterly regime, they showed a decline in visual acuity compared to the Anchor and Marina trial. So the EXCITE study compared the Marina and Anchor monthly trial to the PIRE quarterly regime and found that the quarterly regime was inferior to the monthly regime. So another strategy was thought about to decrease the burden of anti-VEGF injection by combining these anti-VEGF agents with other treatment modalities. So FOCUS trial compared ranibizumab with PDT versus sham with PDT in predominantly classic CNVM. And they found that the combination treatment reduced the treatment burden, but the visual acuity outcomes were found to be inferior to the anti-VEGF monotherapy. So finally, a study was done where OCT imaging was used to develop an individualized dosing strategy known as PRONTO study. PRONTO is prospective OCT imaging of patients with neovascular AMD treated with intraocular ranibizumab. In this study, 3 monthly injection of intravitreal ranibizumab 0.5 mg is given. Then from month 3 till the 24th month, patients were monthly examined with OCT, and additional injections were given only if certain OCT-based criteria is fulfilled, which include 5-letter drop in ETDRS with evidence of submacular fluid and 100 micron increase in central retinal thickness, new hemorrhage in OCT, or new area of classic or persisting fluid. At the end of 2 years, they found that the BCVA outcomes have become similar to the outcomes of Marina and Anger. Besides, they found that the number of injections were 5.6 out of 12 monthly injection in the first year and 9.9 injection out of 24 monthly injections in the second year. So this study was basically designed to minimize the treatment and not the visit, and the patient has to come every month and do OCT. So the comparison of AMD treatment trials was a landmark multi-center, single-blind, randomized, non-inferiority trial that assessed the relative efficacy and safety of 0.5 mg ranibizumab and 1.25 mg bevacizumab. This study enrolled 1,208 patients across 44 centers in USA and is funded by National Eye Institute, USA. And the patients were randomly assigned into 4 groups: ranibizumab 0.5 mg monthly and PRN or Prorinata, and bevacizumab 1.25 mg monthly or Prorinata. So the results of the CAT study are very significant because it was the largest study that performed head-to-head analysis of the 2 most commonly used drugs for neovascular AMD, and also it compared the fixed interval to PRN dosing regime. So at the end of 1 year, we can see ranibizumab monthly has 8.5 letter gain and bevacizumab monthly had 8 letter gain. In the PRN regime, ranibizumab arm had 6.8 letter gain and bevacizumab arm had 5.9 letter gain. So, and at the end of first year, the study found that both these anti-VEGF agents have similar efficacy when administered according to the same dosing schedule. Besides, they found mean decrease in the central retinal thickness was greater in ranibizumab monthly group at the end of 1 year. At the end of 2 years, the BCVA gain in monthly group was 8.8 letter for ranibizumab and 7.8 letter for bevacizumab, and in the PRN arm, it was 6.7 letter gain for ranibizumab and 5 letter gain for bevacizumab. At the end of 2 years, they found that mean BCVA was greater for the monthly group compared to the PRN regime, and treatment with either drug had comparable BCVA improvement if they are in both monthly and PRN dosing. And the anatomical outcome was again found to be better for monthly ranibizumab injection, and in PRN dosing, ranibizumab PRN were found to need very less injections compared to PRN bevacizumab. So the 5-year data from CAT trial, basically the original trial was designed to assess the efficacy between the bevacizumab and ranibizumab and also to see the difference among the monthly and PRN regime. But from the end of the second year of the CAT trial till the follow-up of 5 years, very few patients continue to receive the initially assigned drug or dosing regime. So CAT follow-up 5-year study basically provide information on the overall treatment outcome with anti-VEGF agent, and it gives limited information of efficacy of the individual drug and dosing regime. So during the 3rd to 5-year period after release from CAT protocol, patients were switched to PRN dosing and received an average of 4 to 5 injections per year, and they had mean visual acuity which decreased by additional 11 to 59 letters. So they found that visual acuity gain during first 2 years were not maintained at the 5 years, but 50% of eyes had visual acuity 20 by 40 or better, and 10% eyes had visual acuity 20 by 20. These outcomes were quite unimaginable with PDT and laser photocoagulation, confirming that the anti-VEGF is the major long-term therapeutic treatment for neovascular AMD. Coming to the last anti-VEGF agent, which is aflibercept. It is a fusion protein containing VEGF receptor ligand binding domain and FC region of IgG1. It mainly block all isoforms of VEGF-A, VEGF-B, and placental growth factor 1 and 2. It is given in dose 2 mg per 0.05 ml every 8 weeks. So View 1 and 2 are phase 3 studies, with View 1 being conducted in USA and Canada, View 2 in Europe, Asia, Japan, and Latin America. This study compared aflibercept 2 mg every 4 week, 0.5 mg every 4 week, and 2 mg every 8 week versus ranibizumab 0.5 mg every 4 week. And they found that all aflibercept doses were non-inferior to ranibizumab. Besides, they also found that 2 mg 8 weekly injections after 3 consecutive monthly injection have very decrease in number of injection compared to the other dose. So coming to the anti-VEGF dosing regime, it can be fixed or flexible. Fixed regime is monthly regime, which is not preferred nowadays because of the enormous treatment burden on the patient. And for PRN or Pro-Renata regime includes 3 consecutive monthly injection, then follow up monthly with OCT, and retreatment if there is any increase in OCT central retinal thickness more than 100 micron, or any evidence of fluid or hemorrhage, or loss of best corrected visual acuity of 5 letters or more with submacular fluid. Treat and extend regime include injection monthly for 3 consecutive months, and thereafter, when OCT show no signs of activity, we start extending the gap between injection by adding 2 weeks. That is, from 4 weeks, we extend it to 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, and maximum up to 12 weeks. And anywhere during this period, if the patient shows signs of activity, we reduce the gap between the injection by 2 weeks. So another aspect of treat and extend regime is that we have to inject the patient in every visit, irrespective of the OCT status. That is, even if the OCT is showing compact CNVM with no signs of activity, even then we have to inject the patient. So that is all about the anti-VEGF dosing regimes. There are even more studies done. I would like to request everyone to go through the handout for the details of those studies. And to conclude, we have to address the lifestyle changes, which include smoking cessation, blood pressure control, and obesity reduction. And there should be regular home vision monitoring with an Amsler grid, and antioxidant and mineral supplement as per the AREDS 2 is mainly for intermediate and advanced AMD patient, and intravitreal anti-VEGF agent is the treatment of choice for neovascular AMD now. And treatment strategy mainly employed is PRN based on the signs of activity in OCT. And in the fellow eye of patient with unilateral disease, the fellow eye without CNV remains at high risk of developing advanced AMD. So they should be given ARED supplement and should be instructed to monitor their vision at home using Amsler. There should be regular periodic eye checkup even in the absence of symptoms, and prompt checkup in the onset of any new or significant visual symptoms. And patients at exceptionally high risk, that is, the presence of advanced AMD in one eye and large drusen with RP changes in the fellow eye, should be kept under more frequent follow-up in an effort to detect asymptomatic CNVM at a treatable stage. Follow-up, dry AMD patients should be kept at 3 to 6 monthly follow-up, and they have to do home Amsler's chart at home, and FFA or OCT is indicated if CNVM is suspected. Wet AMD patients should be kept under more frequent follow-up, initially 1 to 2 monthly, with OCT at each visit and FFA if required, and repeat injection should be given if any signs of fresh activity is seen on OCT, and then we gradually increase the duration of follow-up. I would like to thank Dr. Devi ma'am and Dr. Pooja for helping me a lot in making this PPT, and Dr. Avi sir for providing some of the OCT slides which was used in this class. So that's it. Thank you for your patient listening.
Very good, Shruti. Very well presented. Yes, very well presented. This is a very large, very, very vast topic with
Thank you, ma'am.
enormous data available. And
Yeah.
Shruti has very nicely condensed it. into a very exhaustive review for the sake of all the PGs and students. So
Thank
I
you, ma'am.
will, yeah, welcome. I will request the students to come up with any queries or doubts if they have, and I'll request Pooja to moderate this session.
Ma'am, one of the common queries that PGs ask is when do we have to do an angiogram, that is FFA and FFA and ICG. So one thing I would like to tell is that in the era of PDT, FFA and ICG were very important. Even now, if we are planning a PDT, the size of the spot on PDT is determined by the ICG, and therefore it becomes important. But when we routinely see a patient, unless the diagnosis is a dilemma, we usually do not go in for a FFA. So OCT is the gold standard for investigation. FFA is done in cases where there is some discrepancy or some doubt in the diagnosis, like when we are suspecting PCB, RAP lesions. In those cases, FFA becomes important. Ma'am, anything else you want to add about angiogram in ARMD, ma'am?
Yes, actually, Shruti did show one slide about FFA indications, and there are actually three indications she mentioned. So, FFA can be done at baseline, at the first visit of the patient. That is not just to diagnose but also to document and to confirm leakage, and also to know the size and the location of the CNVM. Of course, with nowadays with this anti-VEGF injection therapy, it actually is immaterial. It does not matter whether the CNVM is classic or occult or whether it is subfoveal or extrafoveal, because the treatment remains the same. But however, for the sake of examination, you can say that the baseline one angiogram can be done. And then later on, angiogram can be done when you are in doubt of activity. That is, when the patient is coming for regular reviews and you are not very sure whether the CNVM has become inactive. Although the OCT sometimes can be very much doubtful, there may not be any fluid, and if you have doubt, then you can definitely repeat a FFA. So if the FFA shows leakage, that means it's an active lesion and you may need to start the treatment again. And third is when you are in doubt whether it's a PCV or RAP, these kind of again very borderline diagnosis. In that case, again you can do either FFA, or best is to do both FFA and ICG. Is that now clear, or is there any further doubts
Yes,
about
ma'am.
this?
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am, this is Pallavi. Ma'am, I wanted to ask how to decide which type of anti-VEGF to give. Like few patients initially, when we see the records, they initially were on bevacizumab, and then after that, after a long time, we switched them to some other anti-VEGF.
Yes,
Like,
yes.
what are the indication of changing it?
Yeah, very good. So that is the reason for showing you the studies, that CAT study. So did you, if you look at the CAT study was a comparison between bevacizumab and ranibizumab, whether any one agent is better than the other. But
Yes,
thereafter
ma'am.
there have been other head-to-head trials like I1, GEFAL, and all that. So none of these studies showed any one anti-VEGF being superior to the other. Okay. So basically, all the anti-VEGF agents are almost similar. They almost have similar efficacy and similar safety. What you call profile. So whether you use bevacizumab or ranibizumab or aflibercept, more or less they have all similar effect. So it does not matter which anti-VEGF you are using. It boils down to the economic considerations, because as you go higher from bevacizumab, the expenditure is much more. Ranibizumab and aflibercept is much more costly than bevacizumab. So it depends on how much the patient can afford, because it is not just one or two injections. There are many injections the patient has to take over a period of time. So the cost of the treatment is likely to go very high if you think that a patient wants to take aflibercept every month or every 2 months. It becomes very high. Okay, so the financial
Yes.
considerations are there. And the second part of this switching of the anti-VEGF, you do if you think that the patient is not responding to one anti-VEGF, you can switch to another anti-VEGF. So sometimes this after switching, the patient may respond.
Okay. Thank you.
Ma'am,
Yes.
Ma'am, I wanted to ask, there is a new entity called non-exudative CNVM, which is described in neovascular AMD. So, is that clinically there is no CNVM, but on OCTA there is evidence of vascular abnormal vascular network in the outer retina. Is that right, ma'am?
Yes,
And do
they
we
are
treat such
describing.
patients?
Yes, yes. So this is a new term which is now people are starting to use. This is basically it's called non-neovascular AMD, not CNV. There is a non-neovascular AMD.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Non-neovascular AMD means there is no neovascular network, but you do find a lot of RP irregularity. So if you do OCT, you will see the RP is very irregular. Sometimes there is bumpy. You can have small PEDs, but you do not have any fluid or you do not have any vascular element like a CNVM or RAP. So this becomes a non-neovascular AMD. Yeah, whether
Ma'am,
to
is
treat.
it usually in the fellow eye, in the other eye of a patient who's already having a CNVM in one eye? Is that a criteria, ma'am, to call
Uh,
non-neovascular, ma'am?
No, I don't think so. It is purely based on OCT actually.
Okay,
So
ma'am.
it's not necessary whether the patient should have AMD in the other eye or no. And the picture can change actually. It can become a neovascular AMD. Patient can develop CNVM. Patient can develop fluid, and can become an exudative component. So it is just a entity to describe that particular feature patient where patient remains like that. If you see the patient will have this kind of RP irregularity for many follow-ups, and then suddenly one fine follow-up he will come with some subretinal fluid. So, but oftentimes it is seen in patient who are already on follow-up. So that is why it is being noticed now. And whether to treat
Yes,
or
ma'am.
not is probably will depend on the each individual person's, the doctor's view, and what is the status of the other eye. So if the other eye has already lost to AMD, then sometimes you are more cautious and you would like to treat such a patient. But even then, in the absence of fluid, it is not mandatory to treat. You can still have a close follow up and wait and watch.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Are you all clear about how to diagnose AMD and how to follow up AMD?
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay, very good. And since the treatment has now become very important and the trials are also very important, so both Pooja and Shruti have made a very exhaustive handout. So please go through the handout. It gives a gist of all the trials in AMD. So I think it will help you prepare for the exam. At least you will know what exactly each trial is for. Okay. So the
Yes.
details of trial you can read up in various journals, but it gives you a small gist. So
Yes, ma'am.
anything else you would like to add, Pooja?
No, ma'am, that's all, ma'am.
Okay. So Shruti has covered all the treatment modalities right from laser, PDT, Macugen, and all these newer anti-VEGF also. So that is from
Um,
the point of view of the exam because you need to know all these treatment modalities. However, nowadays the current treatment is only anti-VEGF injections.
Ma'am, actually, I didn't mention about the brolozizumab. I thought
Okay.
class will extend even more, so I
Yeah,
left
yeah, it's
it
okay, no
actually.
problem. They can go and read up. Read about rolipizumab. Yeah. Anyway, it is
The
not a
Hawk and
taxing
Harrier
exam.
study I think I've given out in the handout,
And
so you
Yeah,
can
it is
read
there
that.
in the handout. Okay, very good. Yeah. She has mentioned the Hawk and Harrier trials also. Yeah. All right.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
Okay.
Thank you,
Shruti.
Anything
ma'am.
else is there, or
Thank you,
shall we
ma'am.
close?
Yes,
If nothing else is there, because I think it was covered very well by Shruti. Almost everything has been covered. And I really, unless there is some case discussion or something, I really don't have anything else to add.
That's all, ma'am. I think case
Okay.
discussion we
That's it.
can have another time.
Right, right. So good. So very nice. I again congratulate both Shruti and Pooja for a
Thank you, ma'am.
very exhaustive coverage of the topic. And I will request all the students to go through the handout and also maybe Shruti can share this presentation also with all. So go
Yes,
through the
ma'am, I will
slides
do.
again. It's a little difficult to remember these trials because there is so much of details of each, but try to remember at least the main points which are given in the handout. Even if you remember that much, that is useful. Okay. So
Yes.
all the best. Good luck to you, and thank you for attending the class.